On a warm September evening in 2025, two men sat across from each other in the opulent Al Yamama Palace in Riyadh. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan were about to sign an agreement that would send shockwaves across the Middle East and beyond. The document they signed wasn't just another diplomatic formality. It was a mutual defense pact declaring that an attack on one nation would be considered an attack on both. But this wasn't a sudden decision born from panic or desperation. This moment was the culmination of decades of quiet cooperation, shared struggles, and mutual dependence between two nations separated by geography, but united by faith, necessity, and an increasingly complex geopolitical reality. To understand why this pact matters, we must journey back to 1998, when Pakistan stood on the precipice of economic collapse. The country had just conducted its first nuclear weapons tests in response to India's atomic demonstrations, and the world responded with crushing sanctions. Pakistan's foreign reserves had plummeted to a mere $400 million against a staggering debt of $32 billion. The country was weeks away from defaulting on its international obligations. In this darkest hour, an unexpected savior emerged from the desert kingdom of Saudi Arabia. At the time, oil prices had crashed to around $10 per barrel, and the Saudis themselves were grappling with massive budget deficits. Yet, in an extraordinary act of solidarity, Crown Prince Turki bin Faisal made a decision that would reshape regional power dynamics for generations. Saudi Arabia didn't just offer Pakistan a loan, they crafted a lifeline. In May 1998, when Pakistan was deciding whether to respond to India's nuclear tests, the Saudis promised 50,000 barrels per day of free oil to help the Pakistanis cope with the economic sanctions that would inevitably follow. The very next day, Pakistan was promised $3.4 billion in Saudi financial support, funds that helped Islamabad proceed with a second nuclear test. This wasn't merely financial assistance. It was a calculated geopolitical investment. Saudi Arabia allowed Pakistan to purchase oil on deferred payments under a 3-year arrangement, and when the terms ended, Riyadh quietly forgave much of the debt. What began as a commercial transaction became an undeclared bailout that would bind the two nations together for decades to come. The impact of this decision was profound. Pakistan, armed with nuclear weapons and backed by Saudi financial support, had successfully navigated one of the most precarious moments in its history. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia had positioned itself as the guardian of the Islamic world's only nuclear power, a strategic asset that would prove invaluable in the uncertain decades ahead. The 1998 bailout became the bedrock of Saudi-Pakistani relations, but the partnership ran much deeper than financial transactions. An agreement signed in 1982 further cemented this cooperation by ensuring the deputation of Pakistan Armed Forces personnel and military training in Saudi Arabia. Pakistani military advisors helped train Saudi forces, while Saudi funding supported Pakistan's defense infrastructure. Prince Turki bin Faisal would later describe this relationship as one of the closest relationships in the world between any two countries. This wasn't diplomatic hyperbole. It reflected a genuine strategic partnership built on mutual dependence. Pakistan needed Saudi oil and financial support to sustain its economy and military capabilities, while Saudi Arabia needed Pakistan's military expertise and, crucially, its nuclear deterrent. For decades, this arrangement worked quietly in the background of Middle Eastern politics. Pakistan provided military advisors and training to Saudi forces, while Saudi money flowed into Pakistani coffers during times of crisis. The relationship was built on discretion and mutual benefit, allowing both nations to maintain their sovereignty while leveraging each other's strengths. But by 2023, the delicate balance that had sustained this partnership for decades began to shift dramatically. The turning point came not from Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, but from thousands of miles away in the Gaza Strip. When Hamas launched its devastating attack on October 7, 2023, triggering Israel's massive military response, The reverberations were felt far beyond the immediate conflict zone. For Saudi Arabia and other Gulf monarchies, Israel's subsequent actions would fundamentally alter their perception of regional security and American reliability. For decades, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE had been America's closest partners in the Middle East. They hosted numerous American military bases and had built their entire security architecture around the assumption that Washington would protect them from regional threats. This arrangement had served them well through multiple crises, from the Iran-Iraq War to the Gulf War and beyond. But as Israel's military campaign expanded far beyond Gaza, striking targets in Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and Iran, the Arab monarchies watched with growing alarm. These weren't just distant military actions. They represented a fundamental challenge to the regional order that had protected them for decades. The final straw came when Israeli forces struck targets in Qatar, a major American ally and mediator in the Hamas-Israel negotiations. The attack on Doha shattered whatever remained of the Gulf states' confidence in American security guarantees. If Israel could strike a major non-NATO ally that was actively mediating between the warring parties, what protection could Washington really offer? Saudi officials had spent months trying to negotiate a defense treaty with the United States, hoping to formalize the security relationship that had protected the kingdom for decades. They offered massive investments, more than $600 billion in American projects, and even engaged with the Trump administration during his Gulf tour in May 2024. But every proposal came with the same condition. Saudi Arabia would first have to normalize relations with Israel. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's response was unequivocal. In public statements, he accused Israel of committing genocide in Gaza and made it clear that normalization was off the table unless Netanyahu ended the war and took concrete steps toward establishing a Palestinian state. The Americans, unwilling to pressure their Israeli allies, let the negotiations collapse. By late 2024, Saudi officials privately acknowledged what many had suspected for months. A defense treaty with Washington wasn't going to happen on terms the kingdom could accept. It was time to look elsewhere for security guarantees. This brings us to the elephant in the room, Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. While the Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement was signed on September 17, 2025, and officially makes no mention of nuclear weapons, the strategic implications are impossible to ignore. A senior Saudi official told Reuters, regarding whether Pakistan would provide Saudi Arabia with a nuclear umbrella, "This is a comprehensive defensive agreement that encompasses all military means." The careful language is intentional. There is nothing in this agreement that indicates a formation of a nuclear umbrella or any extended deterrence in explicit terms, but the strategic ambiguity serves both nations' interests. Pakistan avoids the complications of formal nuclear sharing arrangements, while Saudi Arabia gains the deterrent benefit of association with a nuclear power. This arrangement isn't unprecedented. During the Cold War, NATO's nuclear sharing agreements allowed non-nuclear members to benefit from American nuclear deterrence without actually possessing nuclear weapons. The Saudi-Pakistani Pact creates a similar dynamic, strategic ambiguity, that provides deterrent benefits without crossing formal proliferation red lines. For Saudi Arabia, this represents a dramatic shift in security strategy. Rather than relying exclusively on American protection, the kingdom now has access to a nuclear-armed ally that operates independently of Washington's oversight. For Pakistan, the arrangement provides crucial financial and energy security from one of the world's wealthiest nations. The true significance of this pact extends far beyond the Middle East. For Pakistan, the agreement addresses its most fundamental vulnerabilities: energy security and financial resilience. Pakistan's military, backed by nuclear deterrence, indigenous arms production, and Chinese weapons, has always been capable of defending the country. What it lacked was the economic endurance to sustain prolonged conflicts. India had long counted on this vulnerability, hoping that Pakistan's limited resources would constrain its ability to engage in extended military operations. But with Saudi oil and financial backing now secured through a formal defense pact, this strategic limitation has been effectively removed. Pakistan can now expand its arsenal beyond what its domestic economy could sustain, while scaling up its arms industry with Saudi financing. For Saudi Arabia, the pact serves multiple strategic purposes. First, it provides a hedge against potential Israeli strikes on Saudi territory. The kingdom sits at the intersection of global trade routes, energy infrastructure, and regional conflicts, all potential targets in any broader Middle Eastern war. By aligning with a nuclear-armed state experienced in both conventional and unconventional warfare, Saudi Arabia gains an ally that can respond without requiring Washington's approval. Second, the pact signals to both Washington and Tel Aviv that the kingdom can chart its own security course. This isn't a complete break with America. Saudi Arabia remains dependent on U.S. military technology and support. Rather, it's a hedge against American unpredictability and Israeli adventurism. The signing of this defense pact has already begun reshaping regional dynamics in ways that extend far beyond the two signatories. Other Gulf states are carefully studying the arrangement, with Qatar, the UAE, and even Egypt reportedly exploring similar bilateral defense agreements. The model of pairing wealthy Gulf financial resources with Pakistan's military capabilities and nuclear deterrent offers an attractive alternative to exclusive dependence on American protection. For India, the pact introduces new complexities into its relationship with both Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. New Delhi has spent the past decade strengthening ties with Riyadh, with bilateral trade reaching nearly $43 billion, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi making multiple high-profile visits to the kingdom. The timing of the Saudi-Pakistani Defense Pact, signed on Modi's birthday no less, sends a clear message about changing regional priorities. The implications for Iran are equally significant. Tehran now faces the prospect of confronting not just Saudi Arabia's conventional military capabilities and American backing, but also the potential involvement of a nuclear-armed Pakistan in any regional conflict. This fundamentally alters Iran's strategic calculations and may force adjustments to its own regional strategy. Perhaps most intriguingly, the pact opens new possibilities for Chinese influence in the region. With Pakistan serving as a bridge between Saudi financial resources and Chinese military technology, Beijing gains a new avenue for projecting influence into the heart of the Middle East without directly confronting American interests. The Saudi-Pakistani Defense Pact represents more than just a bilateral agreement. It's part of a broader pattern of middle powers seeking strategic autonomy in an increasingly multipolar world. From India's diversification of defense partnerships to Turkey's independent foreign policy, nations around the world are reducing their dependence on single great powers and building more flexible alliance structures. This trend reflects a fundamental shift in the global balance of power. The unipolar moment following the Cold War, when American security guarantees were both credible and comprehensive, is giving way to a more complex international system. In this new environment, countries like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan are finding that bilateral partnerships can sometimes provide more reliable security than multilateral alliances dominated by distant superpowers. The Defense Pact also highlights the growing importance of regional powers in shaping global security. Pakistan, with its nuclear weapons and battle-tested military, and Saudi Arabia, with its vast financial resources and strategic location, together represent a formidable combination that can influence events far beyond their immediate neighborhood. As Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif shook hands in that Riyadh palace, they weren't just signing a defense agreement, they were writing a new chapter in the story of Middle Eastern geopolitics. The pact represents the culmination of decades of quiet cooperation between two nations that found strength in each other's weaknesses and security in each other's capabilities. The road ahead remains uncertain. The success of this partnership will depend on how well both nations navigate the complex web of regional rivalries, great power competition, and domestic pressures that define modern Middle Eastern politics. But one thing is clear. The old certainties that governed regional security for decades are crumbling, and new arrangements like the Saudi-Pakistani Defense Pact are emerging to take their place. In an era of strategic competition and great power rivalry, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Islamic Republic of Pakistan have chosen to chart their own course. Whether this bold gamble succeeds or fails, it has already begun reshaping the balance of power in one of the world's most volatile regions. The implications of that September evening in Riyadh will likely be felt for decades to come, as other nations watch, learn, and perhaps follow their example in this new age of strategic autonomy and alliance innovation. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more engaging historical content.